Hi, welcome back. This is week 5 of the Mind Men series on eradicating addiction. I'm Christy O'Connor. I am your host and the creator of this content. So this week we are going to go over cultivating humility through being vulnerable. So it's going to be a fun one. Before we get too far into this week's content, I'd like to take a brief moment and just re-emphasize, if you are needing more time to work with the content in each week, please take it. It is not inappropriate to take 2, maybe 3 weeks between each set of content to really integrate what's being discussed in the lectures, particularly if you don't have any previous experience with things like 12-step programs, or maybe some kind of intensive therapy, or kind of the deeper layers of this interpersonal work. If this is all new to you, I would expect that you would need more than a week to completely digest and integrate the content in these lectures. So there's no harm in taking that time. And in fact, by doing so, you will probably gain proficiency faster than you will if you just rush through all of them. Also, I'd like to re-emphasize that this is not you do the 12-week series and you're fixed. This is meant to guide you into proficiency in terms of developing the skill set of pruning away old destructive behavioral patterns and incorporating in new ones that are more conducive to a happy and healthy life. So this series is meant to act as a guiding force until you have developed your own proficiency in that skill. However, it is meant to provide a framework that you will use throughout the entirety of your human existence so that you can continue to catch yourself should these things resurface or should new forms of dysfunctional behavior come up, so that you can quickly transmute that into something that is going to help you to be the person that you're meant to become and to have the life that we ultimately all want to have. So, if you feel like you're going too fast, slow down a little bit. There's no problem with that. So humility is important because it's the component, the trait that allows us to admit when we're wrong and allows us to admit when we have engaged in behaviors that have been harmful to ourselves and other people. It's not an excuse, but it does give us an ability to access a space of allowance on some level, or acknowledgement. I have engaged in these things, I have said these things, I have done these things that have been harmful to myself or the people in my life. And by acknowledging them, I am empowering myself to do something different. So humility is involved in the part of this that requires us to acknowledge the effects that our dysfunctional patterns have had on ourselves and other people. So this week we're going to work on really sinking into that and how to both cultivate that with ourselves on a personal level and then involving someone else in that process as well. Some brief education things here before we get into the content. Also, you are going to experience cravings and a tendency towards the target behavior, the target addiction, until the new neural pathway is fully formed and becomes dominant. So I just want to be really clear about this, because people can get really discouraged. They expect that, well, okay, I see the behavior, I've figured out what I'm going to do different, and I'm trying to do it different, but it's really hard and I keep slipping back into this old behavioral pattern. That is normal. So instead of looking at it as something that is fundamentally wrong with you as a person, or as you being, especially defective or something like that, look at it as the time that it takes for the new neural pathway to become dominant. So the more you are able to go towards that, the weaker and weaker the old neural pathway is going to get. And the less you are going to crave things, the less you are going to move towards destructive behavior, the more you are going to move towards things that are essentially beneficial for you and the people around you. This is why it is imperative that you keep trying. So you don't want to look at your inability to hold the new behavior as a personal failure or a personal flaw, because it isn't. It is basic neuroscience. That old default pathway is going to remain dominant until it isn't anymore. And typically in the beginning, when you are laying the foundation for the new neural pathway, you will have brief periods of time, or maybe even just instances, where you experience what it's going to be like to integrate that new neural pathway, meaning you'll have moments where you don't have craving. You will have moments where you authentically want to do the new thing, that the healthier alternative, right? But it probably is not going to be something that happens immediately or overnight. More often than not, what happens is you have these moments where you can feel into what it's going to feel like to integrate the new neural pathway, but and until that is completely dominant, the old one's going to slip in there. It's still there. And the longer and stronger sort of relationship, or the strength of the old neural pathway, is going to be a factor in terms of how long and how difficult it is to sort of fill in those old neural grooves, or kind of erase that pathway, if you will, and really make the new neural pathway the dominant one. So remember this. Try not to add shame and guilt for not being able to stick to these new changes immediately. Try to eliminate that from your routine, because that will just make it worse. And look at it from a more scientific perspective of, until this becomes the dominant pathway, I know that I am going to have some tendencies to resort back to old behaviors, addictions, etc. So remember to be very patient with yourself while you're in the space between here, because it's difficult. Once the new pathway is dominant, it's much less difficult, but that intermediate space is quite uncomfortable sometimes. So hang in there and don't stop trying. So for symptom management this week, you don't need to do anything for your time interval. Okay, this is going to be the last week that we're not going to mess with that, basically. So just hold the interval that you've set for yourself. Nothing changes here. If you would like to stretch that out or push yourself in some of the predetermined ways, you can certainly do that, but you don't have to. It's not a requirement. So hold your interval. If you want to push yourself a little bit, and we've talked about ways that you can do this, go ahead. But if it's all you can manage to just hold it, then just hold it. The second thing, make sure you are sitting for at least 10 minutes every single morning. If you have not yet experienced what it feels like to be in that new neural pathway, meaning had moments where you haven't had cravings, or where you are naturally gravitating towards this new way of doing things, if you have not experienced this yet, I want you to continue to reflect on what's happening for you physically, emotionally, and mentally before, during, and after use during your 10 minutes in the morning. If you have experienced what it feels like to be in the new pattern of things, I want you to spend that 10 minutes feeling into the difference between what it feels like to be in the new pathway versus what it has felt like to be in the old. So you are working towards being able to quickly identify what happens for you when the new neural pathway gets lit up versus when the old neural pathway gets lit up. It is going to be extremely helpful for you to be able to identify this as you are working towards solidifying the new neural pathway. So that's what I want you to be doing in the 10 minutes that you're sitting in silence, ideally in darkness, in the morning before you get up and start your day. In the evening, you're going to continue to perform your success inventory. How successful have you been in waiting the allotted time interval? How successful were you in changing any behaviors that you've been working to change, etc. If you were not successful, try to briefly come up with some ways that you can cultivate success for yourself or make success more attainable. Thank yourself for being willing to engage in this and recommit to the process for the following day. Also, I want you to continue to implement the positive change that you have been cultivating over the past few lectures here. So continue to work that into your daily routine as well. So this is really all we're gonna do for the symptom management. We're just gonna hold it while we get through some of this more dense inner work, and then we will get a little more aggressive in terms of making alterations with that in next week's content. So we're gonna go into the wounding now. This is gonna have 2 parts. Okay, the first part is going to be journaling, more writing, and the second part is going to be engaging in dialogue with another person surrounding what your journaling reveals. Okay, so for the journaling component, we're going to do 4 columns again. Okay, and you are going to need your journaling exercise from last week, from week 4, in order to be able to complete this week's journaling prompt. So make sure you have that handy as you are diving into this. For the first column, it is going to be exactly the same as the first column from week 4's chart. So you are going to, in that column, list the emotions, the sensations that push you towards the addiction that you're targeting right now. Okay, so you can even just copy exactly what you wrote down from column 1 in week 4 into this week's column 1, okay? For column 2, this column is going to be identical to column 3 from week 4, okay? So this column is going to be a list of your typical reactions, your typical responses, your typical behavioral things that come up to the column 1, sensations, emotions, etc. So how do you typically respond to the sensations that you listed in column 1? Okay, so again, you can directly copy your column 3 from week 4 to this column 2 if you like, and perhaps you're able to identify more things, as you dive into this. You're welcome to add to it, and if not, you just basically copy paste, okay? This is where it gets different. In the third column, I want you to make a bullet point list of how your reactions to these emotions, sensations, etc. So how your column 2, how those things affect you. Okay, so how do the ways that you are reacting to these emotions, to these physical sensations affect you? How do these affect you? So for example, maybe if your target behavior is smoking and you say, I feel really stressed out, I feel like I can't take a break at work, I feel like dealing with people in customer service heightens my anxiety, and then I want to go have a cigarette. Okay, so that's your programmed response, or your typical response to this sort of energetic experience that you've written down in column 1. Okay, so how does smoking the cigarette affect you? Okay, does it interfere with your breathing? Does it interfere with your ability to socialize with others? Are you self-conscious about it? Do you hate the way that it smells? Do you hate that you either have to sneak off to the bathroom to go vape or go outside to smoke an actual cigarette? Does it interfere with your mental peace by hijacking your dopamine reward pathway? This is me personally, if you haven't, this is how that behavior affects me, but you can get creative with this list. It can be any number of things. So just be really thorough when you're thinking and understanding how your reactions to these various experiences affect you. How do they affect you? And it doesn't have to be all negative either. Maybe you can say, well, I smoke a cigarette, and for at least 30 minutes after I smoke that, I feel much more peaceful than I did, say, the moments leading up to that, or something. So it doesn't have to all be negative, but we're really looking to get a well-rounded understanding of how these behaviors affect you and the consequences, so to speak, that these behaviors and reactions have on your life and on your well-being. So try to be really thorough and really honest about this. You know, there's a tendency to sort of guard the addiction when we start trying to work to do something different, and a lot of excuses can come up and justifying and this, that, and the other. And those are all okay, but really try to be honest about how this affects you, okay? Now, in the fourth column, you are going to make a bullet point list of how your reaction to the column 1 content, how your reaction affects other people. Okay, so how does this programmed response or this learned response or the way that you've conditioned yourself to deal with the column 1, how does this affect people in your life? How does this affect the way you work with customers? How does this affect the people in your family? How does this affect your primary friendships? So with the smoking example, maybe it's, well, when I feel like I can't sneak off and have a cigarette, I get really short with people and I get really snippy and my customer service is terrible. Or maybe it's, you know, I told my wife I wouldn't smoke and now I'm smoking and then she catches me and I lie and I feel bad. So again, how you're really focusing on the effect this has on someone else. Okay, and you want to try to include in this column all of the someone else's that this might affect, whether they are strangers or people that are in your innermost circle and all of the layers in between. So try to be thorough here too, and be really real here too, and try to develop as big of an understanding as you can surrounding how these reactions affect other people, okay? Also, you want to be looking for similarities between column 3 and column 4. Similarities and also how these two are related, okay? So for example, if I feel like I need to go have a cigarette at work and I'm getting really anxious and I'm really uptight and I'm short with everybody and whatever, maybe that creates the same feeling in my coworkers. Maybe then my inability to show up and be nice to people and do my job then creates more work and anxiety for them. And I'm instilling in them the same feeling that I'm trying to go fix by going outside and having a cigarette, okay? So you're trying to establish these connections. Or maybe you find that it pushes other people towards similar reactions, to similar reactions that you have to your own column 1. So ideally what you're trying to identify here is the similarities between how your reactions affect you and how your reactions affect other people. Because although other people's manifestations or the way that they present maybe the same column 1, the same sort of experiences, the same anxieties, the same physical sensations, the way that they show that or live that in the world may look different from you, but we are looking to understand how we cultivate that in ourselves, right? These negative energies, emotions, physical sensations that we're trying to escape, when we cultivate those in ourselves, it does affect other people in a very similar, if not identical way, regardless of the varying presentations of that. So I really want you to look for any direct or indirect similarities between your column 3 and your column 4. You also, it doesn't necessarily have to be directly related to your behavior. You can also look perhaps to people, friends, coworkers, whatever, that have similar behavioral patterns around certain things and see if you can observe a similar process in them. Sometimes it can be helpful to externalize or look at someone else's external process and things in order to get some clarity on our own. So if that's helpful, you can sort of use other people's similar tendencies and patterns to better understand your own if it isn't clear immediately. So be looking at that too. And it can also be helpful to write these similarities down as they become clear and as you start to see them. The more that you can understand yourself and understand how similar you are to the people around you, the faster this is going to go. So try to see those similarities, write them down if you can, okay, both the direct and the indirect. So I want you to look at your column 4 from last week, which was a list of interventions that you could do instead of your pre-programmed response to the column 1. Okay, so instead of sort of the default, if you will, the other alternatives that you created for yourself to use instead. And if you have not already started implementing these, I want you to think about how your column 3 and 4 from this week would change if you were to start implementing them, or how you think they would change if you were to start implementing these different interventions, these different alternatives for yourself. Okay, if you have already started implementing your column 4 from last week, which good on you if you have, I want you to take time to notice the difference between the normal or predetermined reaction to things and how that comes up or shapes column 3 and column 4 versus how the alternative option or the new behavior you came up with shapes columns 3 and 4. Okay, so we're looking for differences between how utilizing the alternative behavior that you wrote down for yourself in column 4 last week, how that impacts you differently, okay, how that affects you differently, and also how that affects the people around you differently. And again, this can be both positive and negative qualities. Maybe it's, well, instead of smoking a cigarette, I'm going to go for a walk. And that is better for me physically. And I know that it's helping heal my brain. And also, not smoking makes me incredibly moody, which I know has a sort of negative impact on my own mental health and makes me very difficult to be around, which impacts my relationships with my family members or my friends, etc. So there may be some mix here as you start to integrate and adopt alternative behaviors. So look for both, and then that way you can keep pruning out some of the more negative aspects. So just remember, what you aren't aware of, you don't have any power to do anything about. So the more you can become aware of your own behavior, of your own reactions to things, the more you are empowering yourself to do something different. So again, try not to slip into shame or guilt as you start to see these things, because it's a part of being human, and being willing to see them means you are giving yourself a chance and an opportunity to do things in the way that you would like to do them and become the person you'd like to become. Okay. If you'd like to take this a step further, which I do encourage you to do, if you have the capacity for it, if not in this round, then in some future implementation of these steps, I would encourage you to, at some point, look at your column 1 this way. You can look at why that particular emotional or physical experience of something. So maybe why the anxiety component, right? Or why dealing with other people? Why is the feeling that brings up? So the column 1, like, why is that so triggering? What I'm asking you to do here is go back early enough in your adolescent years, in your childhood, in your familial upbringing, to understand where that energetic component came from, that energetic dynamic. Okay, so in this example, anxiety and agitation, right? Both from physically not having the cigarette, but perhaps in the previous example we used, dealing with people in customer service. That can be stressful. That can take a lot out of you. So why is that there? Okay, you're trying to go back to see what caused that wounding in the first place. And I'm going to give, I'll give a specific example here. So with the cigarette smoking, for me, that behavioral response, that learned reaction to things started in early adolescence. And it started around the time that I started dating, okay? And what it was a programmed response to the feeling that came up when I would abandon myself, meaning when I would not be in touch with what my boundaries were, what I wanted, what I didn't want, and the resulting inability to be clear about that with someone else. Okay, so when I would abandon myself, this very intense, uncomfortable anxiety that was absolutely crippling would start surfacing. And as I was more and more inauthentic, right, like as that got sort of deeper and deeper, that layer, that anxiety got more and more. Then at some point I was exposed to cigarettes, and what my body on a physical level learned is that and this was true from the very first one I smoked, when I smoked that cigarette, that feeling went away. Not for very long, but it went away. And when that gets to a certain level of intensity, that anxiety, that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I'm not being myself, and I know I'm not being myself, but I can't be myself or else he's not going to like me, that whole thing was why the cigarette smoking developed in me, because I was trying to get away from that. Okay. And just understand too that this understanding for me came only after 2 or 3 years of having some pretty in-depth conversations with myself and having some pretty difficult life lessons come up in those 2 to 3 years in terms of really getting real about what caused this and looking at it, etc. So this may not come up immediately when you start this line of questioning, but what you're looking for is why did this feeling, this thing start to surface? Okay. What initially caused that? And then what do I need to do to fix it? Okay. So for me, it was very simple. This deep anxiety, this deep agitation, this deep sense of something's wrong came with self-abandonment, regular self-abandonment. And so the antidote for that was to not self-abandon, was to be fiercely true to myself, was to learn how to listen to myself and then act in a way that promotes my health, my safety, my well-being, and to do that over and over and over again. Okay. And once that was cemented, the desire to smoke was completely eradicated. Okay. So you can get to the core of some of these issues if you can kind of go back in time and see exactly what caused the column 1, and then do what you need to do to heal that wound, so to speak, so that that wound isn't seeping more of that anxiety, more of that angst, more of that feeling of something's not right. Okay. So you can go into your column 1, and for each of the things that you listed in terms of emotional, physical experiences that push you towards use, you can engage in this process, right? So start asking yourself, like, where did this originate? How old was I when I first started feeling these things? In what kind of dynamic was I in when I first started feeling these things? Was it some kind of dynamic with my parents? Was it some kind of dynamic with a sibling, with boyfriends, with friends? What was it? What was it that started this whole thing? And once you really get answers in that, you have exactly what you need to start working to give yourself whatever it is you need to actually heal the wound, fix the problem, whatever. Okay. So at some point, try to go a layer deeper with your column 1 and really gain as deep of an understanding as you're capable of where these things come from. Again, I would recommend starting this process right now, because my experience was not that I got clarity on those things right away. I had to keep asking and keep prying. And then what happened was I would get real life situations that would show me the answer to this, right? I would meet someone that I would go on a few dates with and then have to see this whole thing come up where I self-abandoned. and it wasn't pretty, but that was the universe, that was the way that I received the answer to this inner line of questioning. So that is a very individual thing, but just know that if you're asking the questions and you're digging into these layers, eventually in some form, you will get your answers. So keep inquiring, keep going deeper, keep asking these really profound questions about where these things came from, and you will not only figure out where they came from, you will also figure out what you need to do to fix them so that they will stop bothering you. Okay, so I would recommend starting that now. All right, now we are going to go into part 2 of the wound healing, which is going to involve you and another person, or maybe multiple other persons. Okay, so what you found out in column 3 that we just did, right? Like how this affects you, in addition to what you found in column 4, how this affects other people. Okay. Through finding the connection between those two things, I want you to start thinking of targeting some people and some relationships that you would feel comfortable having a conversation about these things with. Okay, it's even better if you can have a conversation with the people that are directly being affected by your reactions to your column 1 stuff. So ideally, you're able to bring some of these things up with some of the people that it's affecting. This is not always going to be the case, okay? I am not recommending that you have this conversation or these conversations with someone that is not in a place in their development where they can at least kind of hold space for you, where they can meet you with some element of compassion, where they can understand what you're saying and be a reasonable human being about it. If you are regularly getting caught up in a dynamic with someone where there's a tendency for the other person to immediately blame you for all that is wrong, or an obvious inability for that person to, in any capacity, take responsibility for their own behavior, probably don't bring this stuff up to them, okay? Because you're probably going to get more of the same. So choose wisely when you are choosing people that you want to engage in this conversation with. This can be friends, this can be family members, this can be a therapist, this can be a sponsor. If you are in a 12-step program, if you haven't already noticed this, these lectures, their content do in a lot of ways mirror the 12 steps. They go very, very well together. So if you are involved in a sponsor-sponsee relationship in a 12-step program, this is an excellent conversation to have with your sponsor around the time that you're doing your 5th step in AA would also be ideal. So you want to have these conversations with people that are going to be able to meet you there, okay? Who are going to be able to see and understand to some extent the work that you are doing on yourself, and are going to be able to encourage you and lift you up and be supportive as you dive into this stuff, as you really sink into your humility. Okay, so choose wisely when you're doing this. I want you to share what you found in your column 3 and column 4 with, you can do this with one person, or perhaps for the different things, right? Like perhaps you have a bunch of different things listed on column 1, and so then you have these sort of multiple different categories in terms of your reactions to them, how it affects you, how it affects others, etc. Maybe there's some people that you want to go into certain things with, while you reserve some of the other behavioral patterns for perhaps like a therapist or a sponsor or something like that. So kind of take the time to write out who you would like to share what with. You know, if it's not all with one person, if it's not just with a sponsor, if it's with multiple other people, take a moment to sort of parcel this out and get clear on who you'd like to have the conversations with surrounding the specifics of the reaction and how it's affecting things. Once you've done that, start having the conversations, or have the conversation with the one person. And I want you to very clearly share with them what the reaction is. Okay, so don't skirt around this. Be very clear about it. You know, say, this is how I react when A, B, and C come up. Okay, this is my reaction to that. I see how this is harmful to myself because it manifests as, health problems or certain emotional things that come up or an inability to get along, whatever. You have all of this written down, but be very clear about what your reaction is and how it affects you. Okay, so you're going to verbally share that with someone else. You're also going to share with them what you discovered in terms of how it affects the people around you. Again, anything from the stranger layer all the way to the people that occupy your inner circle and all those in between. So you're going to share all of this with someone, okay? And when you're done talking about this, they may or may not have anything to say about it, okay? They may have some words of encouragement. It may help them actually gain some understanding into their own version of this. It's amazing how when you dive into this work with someone else, you give them permission to be a human being and to have flaws like this. And you also encourage them without even saying anything to engage in a similar process for themselves. And it's wildly contagious in a hugely positive way. So perhaps they are having some realizations about that. Maybe they don't have anything really to say. They're like, cool, I'm glad you shared that, moving on. In any event, regardless of what their reaction is, I want you to ask them to hold you accountable should they see these things coming up. And this is why it's helpful, if it's available, to choose people that have been affected by your reactions to your column 1 experiences. Okay, so because basically what you're doing is you're copping to it. You're saying, I know that this negatively affects me. I know that this negatively affects you. And now I want you to help hold me accountable by letting me know when you're seeing this thing surface. And if you have clarity on this, it can be helpful to add, here's how I would like you to communicate this with me. Because if someone calls you out on something and you're already agitated, there's a high chance that at some point or another, you're going to get defensive around it. So if you know a way that someone can basically call you out on what you're asking them to call you out on in a way that feels non-threatening and that feels like something that you will be able to digest, even when you're maybe in a state of dysregulation and not feeling that great, share that with them because it's going to set them up for success and it's going to set you up for success. Okay, so you're asking someone to say, when you see this surfacing in me, I would appreciate it if you would call me on it, because sometimes, especially early on in this, other people can see things come up in us before we can see it at all. Okay, so it's helpful to not only be checking yourself, but to ask some person or people that you trust to also help check you. All right, and this is the part where we're using humility, right? We're using this ability to say, I've been wrong. I have not been acting correctly. This is my understanding of how that affects me and how it affects you. We're using that. And we're creating this vulnerability with this other person by sharing this with them, by saying, I am not perfect. I am trying to be better. I am humbly asking for your help as I go through this very difficult process with myself. And most of the time, if you are asking someone who is trustworthy and who is truly your friend and who is truly available to show up for you, they are going to be thrilled to help you with this. And they are going to be supportive and they are going to do their best to show up for you in the way that you need them to. And if they aren't able to do this, try not to get angry. Just leave it and choose someone who can. Okay? Again, whether it be a therapist or a sponsor, maybe it is a family member, maybe it is a close friend, maybe it's a sibling, whatever it is, just choose people that are available and that want to help you as you go through this part of the inner work. Okay? So this step, this part is potent in the medicine that it offers. I have personally experienced and witnessed this relatively simple sort of confession almost, if you will, really open up and expose the sort of more dense, dark stuff that people carry around to light, and they feel immediately freed from sort of these more shameful, heavy parts that they've been carrying around for long periods of time. It's almost as though saying it and acknowledging it, it robs a lot of these things of the power that they have over us. And this is really important. It's really important to understand that these reactions, these behaviors that we acquire as maladaptive coping mechanisms to our column 1 stuff, this is a very human thing to do. And when we talk about it, we really understand this experientially, where we're like, okay, I'm not a terrible person. I have just acquired some very dysfunctional behavioral patterns as a result of not knowing any other way. Okay. And now I am trying to adopt this other way, or I am engaged in this process of finding another way. And so I don't feel as imprisoned or entrapped by these behaviors or these responses or these emotions that used to completely rule my life. So really try to be as thorough with this as you can, and really try to talk about all of the stuff on the chart that you just made with at least someone, and if you prefer, multiple someones. Okay. Try to say all of it out loud to someone, because I can almost guarantee you it will immediately lessen the power that these things have over you. Okay. And I would also be willing to bet that if you have not yet experienced times and instances without craving, after thoroughly doing this exercise, you most likely will. So really important to be thorough here, really spend some time with this, and really be as honest as you can with yourself and with whomever you choose to share these realizations with, these understandings with. So after you have shared all of the content on the chart that you made with someone else, take a moment and reflect on how your relationship with these different reactions, with these different behavioral reactions, has shifted or changed. Okay, you can do this in your morning reflections after you get this done. You can do it throughout the day. You can do it as things come up that cause the column 1 to show up. All right, so really check in with yourself to see how you feel differently about these reactions to things after you've performed this inventory and talked about these things with someone else. The other thing you can do is, again, start implementing the alternative options that you came up with for yourself in column 4 of last week, and observe how that shifts column 3 and 4 from this week. Observe how that changes things in terms of how the reactions affect you, how they affect your dynamics with other people, how they directly affect other people. Okay, and start noticing when you find an alternative option that really feels like it's something that you want to permanently adopt without alteration, meaning you lean into a different response than the programmed response, and you feel like, wow, that was so much better than reaching for a cigarette, or than losing my temper with this person, or whatever. So just really make note of that mentally, or you can write it down too, when you find alternative options that feel really healthy and really good and like a huge step in the right direction. Those are the ones we want to hang on to. So however you want to keep track of those things, whether it's by practicing them, writing them down, ideally both, start to really lean into that and be aware of the changes that it's making in you and in how you are interacting with other people. Okay. This is a big bite. Take your time with it. Okay. And once you feel like it's relatively complete for this round of things, like you have gone as deep as you're willing or capable of going for this round of the work, and you've transparently and completely shared your findings with other people, then feel free to move on to week 6 content. All right, good luck with this. I'll look forward to seeing you in a week. Be well.